Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the 10-man heroic mode version of Primordius in the Throne of Thunder raid. Now in order to complete this fight you're going to want to bring 2 tanks, 2 to 3 healers, 2 if you want to, push the DPS a bit, or 3 if you want to play it safe for your first kill. I'd recommend 3 personally, and the remaining a mixture of both melee and ranged DPS. It doesn't really matter what you do bring, they're both effective in this fight. Now, unfortunately, first things first, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I found this fight to be a little bit boring. It's not really different from the normal mode version, just more damage. But nevertheless, we'll still take a look at it, and hopefully we'll get you a nice kill. So you should keep in mind that the majority of this fight is based around the normal mode version of the encounter, and I recommend you have a good understanding of that fight before you do actually go ahead and attempt this fight. And the general majority of abilities is still the same, however they will deal more damage because, heroic mode lol. That's what they normally do. There are a few new abilities that I will speak about in a moment, and we'll also take a look at how to deal with these abilities and inevitably get yourself a nice little kill and some epic loot. That's what we like the loot. So on the heroic mode version of this fight, your tanks will be a bit more involved now, thankfully. And this is because you'll have to deal with a new ad that spawns, and you'll probably see this spawning quite regularly on screen because, well, it does spawn quite regularly. And this new ad is called a Vicious Horror, and this will spawn throughout the whole fight so that you'll have to deal with it. Now this ad does need to be tanked, and this is one of the main reasons why you do need 2 tanks. Obviously you still need 2 because of the malformed blood and the primordial strike debuffs that Primordius will deal, but the Vicious Horror that spawns will also place a debuff on the tank that is tanking it, and this debuff is called Black Blood. And this will, it doesn't sound like much, but this will inflict 20,000 nature damage every 3 seconds. And that's it really, that's a bit of a stacking debuff, so you will need to be aware of that. And we had the tank swapping between Primordius and the horrors every 2 horrors. So at that point you should have, so many debuffs of Primordial Strike and Malformed Blood, and so many debuffs of the Black Blood debuff itself. Now, you need to be careful of this horror, because if it is to get within range of Primordius, I think it's a very close range, it's something like 10-15 yards, pretty much you can't stack them on top of each other, then the horror will blow up and it will deal effectively 1,000,000 damage to your raid, I think it works out to be. So it's a wipe. So you just need to make sure you don't take him anywhere near Primordius. Now something your tank should also be aware of is the Black Blood debuff actually benefits you as well. Because if you do have the Black Blood debuff on you, it will also inflict an additional 20,000 nature damage to Primordius. So that's something to help you out with. Obviously he does take reduced damage at the start, so getting that extra burst of damage from tanks having debuffs on them can always help you. As for killing this ad, you want to make sure that it is dead as soon as possible, so what we did was we made sure that as soon as it spawned, the tank picked it up, took it to the centre of the room really, so it's kind of out the way and people still have room to move around, and then every ranged DPS swapped to it and nuked it as soon as possible. You need to make sure that you don't have 2 of these up at the same time, because that can then cause issues with tank swapping and also tanks getting too many debuffs on them at any one time. Now that is it on the kind of ad front and major changes to the fight, and that is what will kind of make it a heroic fight, making sure you can manage the horrors and, not blow up the raid. The next ability that has changed, and unfortunately is the final change for the heroic mode version of the fight, is his evolution ability, and this is when he will kind of level up from mutating due to the living fluids and the mutagenic pools that he can absorb. Now in normal mode difficulty he can have up to 3 mutations at any given time, whereas in heroic mode difficulty he can have up to 4 mutations at any given time. So this is obviously what's going to annoy your healers ever so slightly. But, it's all fun and games. So just to remind everyone, the mutations that you can have are the ventral sacs, which will cause him to inflict a small amount of nature damage to everyone in the raid every second. The gas bladder, which is the green AoE circle around him that you need to move into in order to split a very, very high amount of damage. I think it's 1,000,000 nature damage between everyone that's in it. The acidic spines, which requires you to stay spread by 3 yards, which will inflict a decent amount of nature damage to anyone that's within 5 yards of the person that gets hit by the spines. There's the pathogen glands, which is where he will target a random player with a debuff, and he'll inflict a high amount of nature damage every second for 10 seconds that just needs to be healed through. There's the metabolic boost, which is what will increase his attack speed and use his abilities more often by 50%. So obviously that's going to cause him to cast everything else a lot more regular. And you might also need to consider using cooldowns on tanks when he does get metabolic boost, because he can start to hurt quite a bit, especially when people have the debuffs on them and get the debuffs applied to them more regularly. And the final mutation is the erupting pustules one. And this is where he will, spray nature bits of doom at the entire raid, and this will inflict a high amount of nature damage to anyone that does get hit by them. However, you should bear in mind that you can move from them. They target a location on the ground that allows you to just walk away from them. So yeah, they're all of your mutations. Any 4 of those can be active at any one time. And I think if your DPS is good enough, you should be looking to kill Primordius after his 8th mutation. I think at that point he kind of starts hitting an enrage timer, so you need to make sure you are dealing enough damage to him. When it came to players actually getting mutated and gaining the beneficial buffs and becoming, a lookalike of Primordius, we allowed the melee DPS to get fully mutated first, because this allows them to then stay on the boss at all times. And then the ranged players would get fully mutated because they're moving about a bit more. They're swapping and changing to vicious horrors, and melee kind of did take priority to just stay on the boss. That extra damage does help you. And then once both melee and ranged DPS have become mutated, we let the healers become mutated, because, as he does evolve, more and more damage does get put out. So it is kind of vital that the healers do get some form of mutation. Even if it is just a few of the buffs, it will help you in the long run. So that's going to do it for this Mr. Pandaria raiding guide. As I've said, unfortunately the fight isn't overly interesting. However, you should keep in mind that it is a fairly simple fight at heart. You just need to make sure that you can heal through the damage that is being outputted. So this is probably one of the fights, if you are struggling to kill the heroic bosses, you could think, okay, maybe we could go and kill Primordius and get some free heroic loot off that, because he's a simple boss. I think we managed to kill him on the 3rd try. We got him to like 20% on the 1st try and then killed him on the 3rd try. It's not really a heroic boss, if I'm being honest, but nevertheless, go for it if you do need an easy kill. So as always, thank you for watching, and if you are interested in future Mr. Pandaria raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel.